What if the person you trusted most suddenly didn't feel like yours anymore? Daniel Harper had always believed life was predictable. A stable job in Toronto, a quiet apartment by the lake, and a marriage that, on the surface, looked perfect. 5 years of marriage to Laura, his calm and practical wife, had built a life that seemed safe. They rarely fought, rarely surprised each other, and rarely felt the kind of passion they had when they first met. Love had become comfortable, but that comfort was starting to feel like emptiness. He remembered the early days vividly. Laura's laugh, the way her hand fit into his, the small details that had once made him feel alive. Now, the apartment was quiet in a way that felt heavy. Their conversations had shrunk to logistical updates, work, groceries, bills. Weekends were spent side by side, yet apart. Daniel had tried to ignore the gnawing feeling in his chest, telling himself it was normal for marriages to change. But deep down, he felt the absence of connection, the subtle erosion of intimacy. Could a life of routine really mask what was already slipping away? It was during one ordinary Thursday that everything began to shift. Laura called her twin sister, Lena, asking if she could stay for a while. Lena had just returned from Vancouver after a difficult breakup, and Laura insisted her presence could bring comfort, and perhaps a little distraction, from loneliness. Daniel didn't hesitate. Lena was family, after all. It seemed harmless. The first evening Lena arrived, Daniel noticed the uncanny resemblance. Same eyes, same smile, same voice. But there was something different. Lena had an energy that Laura did not. She was curious, playful, and present in a way that pulled Daniel in immediately. She asked questions, remembered details, and laughed easily at his dry humor. Laura remained her usual reserved self, smiling politely while listening. Daniel told himself repeatedly, "It's just family. Nothing else." But subtlety can be dangerous. When does attention turn into temptation? Over the next few days, Daniel and Lena found themselves sharing small, unplanned moments. Morning coffee together while Laura slept late. Casual chats in the kitchen after dinner. Texts about mundane things that somehow felt personal. Daniel was drawn to her in ways he didn't want to admit, yet the attraction wasn't just physical. It was emotional. Lena listened in a way Laura hadn't for months. She acknowledged his frustrations, encouraged his ideas, and made him feel seen. "You deserve to feel heard," Lena said one evening softly, as he described stress at work. Not ignored. Not invisible. Daniel felt a rush of guilt and excitement simultaneously. He loved Laura. He had promised forever. But Lena was a mirror, familiar yet thrillingly different. For the first time in months, Daniel felt alive, noticed, and important. Laura noticed nothing. Or maybe she chose not to see. What happens when understanding begins to blur boundaries? Daniel caught himself thinking about Lena at work, at the cafe, even when walking home. He was aware of the danger, but unable to stop the pull. Every glance, every small joke, every shared story, felt like threads weaving a connection he wasn't supposed to have. He tried to rationalize, it was just companionship, nothing more. But the heart rarely listens to reason. One evening, he found Lena on the balcony, gazing at the city lights. She spoke quietly about her breakup, her mistakes, her regrets. Daniel listened. She didn't touch him. She didn't need to. Her words, her presence, the way she understood without judgment, it was intoxicating. Daniel felt a line forming in front of him, a bright, unspoken boundary between loyalty and desire. But he didn't step back. Not completely. He lingered. He leaned in. How far can attraction grow before it becomes betrayal? Lena seemed aware of the tension she created but never forced it. Her charm was subtle, unintentional, yet powerful. Daniel knew the risk, yet each conversation, each shared laugh, made it harder to resist. Laura continued her routines, blissfully unaware, leaving gaps that Lena quietly filled. Daniel tried to distance himself. He avoided lingering glances, kept conversations brief, and reminded himself of his vows. Yet even a simple smile from Lena made his chest tighten. The more he tried to resist, the more he realized that his feelings weren't just fleeting, they were growing. ***, what if the person you trusted most becomes a stranger, and someone else fills the space you didn't know was empty? ***, one night, after Laura had gone to bed, Daniel found himself sitting beside Lena in the living room. They spoke softly, about dreams, regrets, and lost opportunities. Lena looked at him differently than Laura ever did. She didn't need him to be perfect. She just saw him. And Daniel, exhausted from pretending he was content, felt something stir that frightened him, desire, longing, and guilt all wrapped together. He stood abruptly. "I shouldn't be here," he said, heart pounding. "You're human," Lena replied. "And you feel things. That's okay." Daniel didn't respond. He went to bed, but sleep was elusive. His thoughts raced, memories of Laura and Lena intertwining in ways that made his chest ache. He understood something dangerous. Boundaries had been crossed in his mind, even if not in action. ***, could a single week change everything in a marriage? ***, the next morning, Lena avoided eye contact, packing her things for a temporary outing. Laura remained unaware, going about her usual routine. Daniel tried to act normal, but his internal struggle grew heavier by the hour. Each smile from Lena felt like a challenge, each laugh a temptation he couldn't ignore. He realized, with a cold clarity, that life would never feel the same. Nothing could erase the awareness of his emotions, the recognition that he was no longer completely loyal in thought, if not in deed. The line had moved. And he didn't know if he could step back over it. Daniel returned to his day, trying to maintain the facade of normalcy. Yet every glance at the empty chair where Lena had sat yesterday was a reminder. A warning. A promise of chaos. ***, because sometimes, the person you love is beside you, and the person you desire is dangerously close. ***, that night, Daniel lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He knew the week had set something in motion. Something inevitable. Something that would change his marriage, his loyalty, and his life. And just as he finally felt the pull of exhaustion, a knock at the door startled him. It was Lena, standing there with an expression he couldn't read. ***, and in that instant, Daniel realized that nothing would ever be the same again. What happens when a secret attraction grows quietly until it becomes impossible to ignore? Daniel woke up the next morning with a knot in his stomach. The knock on the door from last night, Lena's soft, uncertain gaze, it kept replaying in his mind. He couldn't tell Laura. He couldn't tell anyone. Even thinking about it made his chest tighten. He knew he had crossed a mental boundary he could never uncross, and the realization left him restless. Lena stayed with them for another week, and the rhythm of their lives began to shift. Laura continued her work and daily routines, trusting her husband completely, unaware that Daniel's thoughts were now divided. Lena, careful yet unintentional, filled the emotional gaps that Daniel had long ignored in his marriage. She noticed his small frustrations, remembered the little things about him no one else paid attention to, and somehow made him feel alive again. Every laugh they shared, every meaningful glance, intensified the pull he felt toward her. ***, how easily does comfort become temptation when loneliness walks in quietly? ***, Daniel tried to limit his time with Lena, convincing himself it was only a temporary visit. He kept conversations short, avoided prolonged eye contact, and forced himself to focus on work. Yet, each attempt at distance was sabotaged by the subtle way she entered his life, offering advice, sharing stories, laughing at his jokes in a way that Laura hadn't in months. She made the mundane feel intimate. She made him feel seen. And Daniel, against his better judgment, began to rely on that feeling, craving it more with each passing day. Lena didn't manipulate or force anything. Her behavior was natural, almost innocent. She wasn't trying to hurt anyone, yet the effect was undeniable. The more Daniel interacted with her, the more he realized he was thinking about her constantly, what she would say, how she might react, even how she smiled when she caught him watching her unknowingly. The emotional tension was growing, and Daniel could feel the walls of his marriage trembling from the inside. ****, when does emotional closeness cross the line into betrayal? ***, one evening, after Laura had gone to bed, Daniel found Lena sitting on the balcony, gazing at the city skyline. Rain had started, drizzling softly, and she seemed almost lost in thought. Daniel hesitated at the doorway before stepping out, unsure if he wanted to talk or just share the quiet. They spoke about small things at first, work, neighbors, memories of childhood. But the conversation soon turned deeper. Lena shared her insecurities, her past heartbreaks, and the mistakes she had made in relationships. Daniel felt a strange relief in sharing his own feelings of emptiness, frustrations with the routine of marriage, and the silent loneliness he had kept bottled up for years. Lena didn't judge. She listened, really listened. And for Daniel, that was intoxicating. "You're human," Lena said softly, almost whispering. "You can feel things without shame. Even feelings you think you shouldn't." Her words struck him like lightning. He knew she was right. He did feel something he shouldn't, and yet he couldn't deny it. He felt a connection, not physical yet, but emotional, that was growing stronger with each passing day. And it scared him more than he wanted to admit. ***, how can desire grow so quietly that it feels like fate rather than choice? ***, the next day, Daniel attempted to regain control. He stayed at work late, avoiding any unnecessary interaction with Lena. He forced himself to focus on projects and emails, convincing himself that distance would help him regain clarity. But by the time he returned home, Lena had left a note on the kitchen table. ***, I hope you're taking care of yourself. See you tonight. ***, Daniel's chest tightened. Seeing her handwriting, knowing she had thought of him even when apart, made him feel both guilty and thrilled. He wondered if Laura would ever understand how it felt to have someone notice the little parts of him that no one else did anymore. He also realized, painfully, that he was already thinking about Lena more than his own wife. ***, what happens when longing and guilt collide? ***, by the fourth day, Daniel and Lena were finding themselves alone more often, purely by coincidence, or so they told themselves. Laura was busy with a work project that took her out of the house most evenings. Dinner for Daniel and Lena became an unspoken routine. They laughed together, shared memories, and occasionally lingered in silence, feeling the weight of emotions neither had yet named. Daniel began to notice small changes in himself. He smiled more, yet he felt an undercurrent of anxiety. His mind constantly shifted between guilt for feeling this way and the undeniable thrill of being understood and noticed by Lena. Even mundane things, like pouring coffee or watching a TV show together, carried a new, electric tension. One evening, as they were tidying the living room, Lena accidentally brushed her hand against his while reaching for a book. Daniel froze, heart pounding. Neither said anything. The moment passed. But the memory lingered, a spark in the darkness of his marriage that he couldn't extinguish. ***, can a single moment change the course of loyalty forever? ***, later that night, Daniel lay in bed beside Laura, her breathing calm and steady. He felt a cold distance between them, like a wall he couldn't scale. Thoughts of Lena danced in his mind, and he realized that the line between fidelity and betrayal was no longer clear. Emotional intimacy had shifted. His heart and mind were now divided, and he couldn't predict what would happen next. Sleep didn't come easily. Daniel turned over, staring at the ceiling, replaying every smile, every laugh, every soft word Lena had shared. He knew he was crossing an invisible threshold, one that, once passed, might never allow him to return fully to Laura. He felt trapped between desire and loyalty, exhilaration and fear. What if 1 week of closeness could forever alter a life you thought was secure? By the end of the week, Lena's influence was undeniable. Daniel felt changed. His thoughts, his feelings, his desires, all were shifting in ways he had never anticipated. The familiar, safe marriage he had known felt distant, almost unreal. And yet, he couldn't stop thinking about Lena, couldn't stop craving her understanding, her attention, the way she made him feel alive. The week concluded quietly. Lena prepared to leave for a few days, supposedly visiting friends. Daniel felt a hollow ache at the thought of her absence. He realized, with a frightening clarity, that he had begun to care for her more than he wanted to admit, and that care was dangerous, even if it wasn't physical. Because sometimes the heart sees what the mind refuses to acknowledge. That night, as he watched the rain streak across the window, Daniel knew that life would never be the same. The bond with Lena had already planted seeds of desire and confusion. Laura remained unaware, loving, and trusting. But Daniel understood one painful truth: nothing could ever return to the simplicity it once had. And just as he considered how to act, or not act, he heard the soft creak of the guest room door. Lena was standing there, holding her coat, looking at him with an expression he couldn't read. And in that moment, Daniel realized the real test had begun. What if a single decision could unravel everything you thought you knew about love and loyalty? Daniel had spent the past week battling a storm inside himself. The quiet moments with Lena had left a mark he couldn't erase. Every glance, every laugh, every shared story replayed in his mind like a movie he couldn't turn off. He loved Laura, he truly did, but Lena had awakened something that Laura hadn't in months. Something raw. Something emotional. Something dangerous. Can a connection built on understanding become irresistible? One rainy afternoon, Laura had gone out of town for a business meeting, leaving Daniel alone in the apartment. Lena was still there, packing a few things for her next visit elsewhere. Daniel told himself to keep his distance. He sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, pretending to be engrossed in emails. But he felt the pull of her presence across the room, a silent magnet he couldn't resist. Lena looked up from her packing, noticing him. She didn't smile, didn't approach him, but their eyes met, and in that instant, Daniel felt the tension that had been building for days explode silently in his chest. It wasn't physical. Not yet. But it was undeniable. What happens when desire grows quietly in the shadows of loyalty? They spoke cautiously at first. About mundane things, work, the city, plans for the weekend. But as the conversation deepened, Lena began to share her fears, her loneliness, and the mistakes she had made in past relationships. Daniel found himself opening up in ways he hadn't with Laura for months. He spoke about his frustrations, his sense of invisibility, and the longing he hadn't admitted existed. Lena didn't judge. She listened. She understood. And Daniel, feeling validated, drew closer, mentally, emotionally, dangerously. "You deserve to be noticed," Lena said softly. "Even in ways that might scare you." Daniel's heart raced. He knew the line was there. The line he had promised never to cross. But the pull was almost unbearable. Her words, calm and innocent as they were, made him feel alive in a way he hadn't felt in years. When does emotional intimacy cross into betrayal? Daniel tried to stop himself. He left the room under the pretense of taking a phone call, wandered through the apartment, and breathed heavily. He tried to remind himself of Laura, of their vows, of the life he had built. But even as he repeated these reminders, his mind kept drifting back to Lena, her laugh, her intensity, the way she made him feel like he mattered. Later that evening, Lena accidentally brushed his hand while reaching for a book on the shelf. Neither of them said a word. They didn't need to. The moment spoke louder than anything could. Daniel's chest tightened, and guilt washed over him. He realized that he was already crossing a line in thought and emotion, even if nothing physical had yet happened. What if one small spark can ignite a wildfire? Over the next few days, Daniel became increasingly restless. He tried to focus on work and chores, to maintain normalcy. But every small interaction with Lena was loaded with tension. When she laughed at his jokes, his heart jumped. When she shared a story about her past heartbreaks, he felt an aching connection he hadn't felt with Laura in months. Each moment pushed him closer to an emotional cliff he wasn't sure he could step back from. He began to question himself. Was this just loneliness speaking? Or was it something deeper, something that revealed a truth about his marriage he hadn't wanted to face? He loved Laura, yes. But he hadn't felt this alive, this understood, in years. Lena's presence made him question everything he thought he knew about love and fidelity. ***, can guilt and desire coexist without destroying a person? One night, after Laura had gone to bed, Daniel found Lena sitting quietly in the living room. Rain tapped softly against the windows. They spoke in low tones, not about trivialities, but about dreams, regrets, and the paths they had taken in life. Lena's eyes softened as she looked at him. She didn't move closer physically, but her words, her gaze, and her understanding pulled him in with the weight of inevitability. You don't have to feel guilty for feeling, she said. Feelings don't ask permission. Daniel's throat tightened. He knew she was right. He felt something growing inside him, a dangerous, irresistible emotion he could no longer contain. He wanted to resist. He tried. He left the room abruptly, telling himself that sleep would bring clarity. But in bed, every thought was consumed by Lena. ***, what happens when the heart refuses to obey the mind? ***, by the end of the week, Daniel's emotional turmoil had reached its peak. Lena's departure for a short visit elsewhere left a hollow ache in his chest. He realized, with a clarity that frightened him, that his feelings for Lena were no longer fleeting. They had taken root, intertwining with his life and thoughts in a way he hadn't anticipated. His loyalty to Laura felt compromised, not through action but through the intensity of his emotional connection to Lena. He walked through the apartment, staring at spaces where Lena had sat, laughed, or shared a story. Each empty chair, each untouched book, felt like a silent reminder of the line he was dangerously close to crossing. He understood now that nothing would feel the same again. His heart had been divided, and the guilt and desire were now inseparable. ***, can love survive when the heart secretly belongs somewhere else? ***, Daniel realized he was standing at a crossroads. One path led back to the familiar safety of his marriage with Laura, a path that demanded silence, suppression, and denial of the feelings that had arisen. The other path was unknown, risky, and fraught with temptation, but it was filled with the intensity and understanding that he hadn't felt in years. The internal conflict left him sleepless. Each night he replayed the moments with Lena, wondering if he could ever be whole without acknowledging the emotional connection that had grown between them. Each morning, he woke with a heavy chest, knowing that the situation could not remain as it was, ***, because sometimes, desire doesn't announce itself. It grows quietly, until it is impossible to ignore. On the last night before Lena left, she knocked on his door. Daniel's heart raced as she entered, her expression calm but filled with something he couldn't read. She said nothing at first. She simply looked at him, and Daniel felt the weight of every moment they had shared, the laughter, the understanding, the tension, and the emotional intimacy. In that moment, Daniel realized the truth. Nothing between him and Lena had been physical yet, but the emotional bond was undeniable. And that bond was powerful enough to change everything about his marriage, his loyalty, and his life. And just as Lena turned to leave, she whispered something that would haunt Daniel for days. Some things you can't unfeel, even if you wanted to. What if the choices you make to protect love end up testing it more than anything else? Daniel woke to the quiet of the apartment, the weight of the past week pressing on him. Lena had left the night before, and with her absence, the silence was almost deafening. He moved through the rooms, glancing at the spaces where she had lingered, felt the echo of her laughter, the faint imprint of her presence. His chest tightened. He knew what he had felt for Lena, and it was no longer something that could be ignored or dismissed. Can a marriage survive when trust has been silently tested? Laura returned from her trip that evening. She looked refreshed, calm, and unaware of the emotional storm that had raged in her absence. Daniel wanted to tell her everything, to confess the confusion, the longing, the emotional attachment, but he knew the words could shatter her world. Instead, he acted as if nothing had changed, keeping the conversation light, mundane, and safe. Every laugh, every glance, every casual touch reminded him of what he had allowed to grow in his heart. He realized that love was no longer simple. It wasn't a matter of right or wrong, it was a tangled web of loyalty, desire, and the unexpected depth of emotional connection he had discovered with Lena. He wanted to make things right, but he didn't know if the path to forgiveness was even possible. What happens when temptation forces you to confront your own heart? Over the next few days, Daniel threw himself into work and household responsibilities. He cleaned, cooked, and tried to rekindle moments of normalcy with Laura, but everything felt strained. She noticed his quiet tension, the hesitation in his voice, the distance in his eyes. "Is everything okay?" she asked one evening, concern flickering across her face. "I'm fine," he replied automatically, though his chest ached with the truth he couldn't share. Daniel realized that honesty might destroy the life they had built. Yet, silence was becoming heavier than the burden of confession. He had to make a choice, not just about Lena, but about himself, his integrity, and the marriage he still cared for deeply. Can forgiveness be found when trust has been compromised emotionally, even without betrayal in action? Weeks passed. Daniel and Laura began attending marriage counseling together. Slowly, they unpacked the layers of distance, unmet needs, and emotional gaps that had allowed Lena's presence to resonate so strongly in Daniel's heart. He confessed his feelings, not in detail, but enough to reveal the emotional infidelity he had experienced. Laura listened, her emotions a mix of pain, relief, and careful consideration. She didn't respond with anger, but with an honesty that mirrored the gravity of the situation. Daniel felt both shame and relief. Sharing the truth was like opening a window after being trapped in a dark room. He realized that love wasn't just about passion or desire, it was about understanding, communication, and a willingness to rebuild what had been frayed. Can love survive honesty when the heart has been divided? Lena stayed away. After that, the emotional tension that had pulled Daniel toward her dissipated with distance, leaving only the lessons she had imparted, about longing, attention, and the fragility of unspoken desires. Daniel began to see his marriage with new eyes, understanding the mistakes he had made and the emotional voids he had neglected. Laura, too, began to notice changes in herself. She reflected on her own patterns of quiet detachment, the routines that had made their life comfortable but distant. Together, they started rebuilding not just trust, but connection. Small gestures became meaningful, sharing breakfast, leaving notes for each other, and taking long walks to talk openly about their feelings. Is rebuilding love possible after the heart has strayed emotionally? Months later, Daniel and Laura were still navigating the fragile terrain of reconciliation. Counseling continued, conversations deepened, and slowly, laughter returned to the apartment. The shadow of Lena's influence remained, but it no longer defined their lives. They learned to communicate with intention, to notice the small things that had once gone unappreciated, and to nurture a love that was resilient rather than routine. Daniel often thought about Lena, but no longer with longing or guilt. Her presence had been a mirror, showing him what he had been missing, and guiding him back to the heart of his marriage. Lena had been a catalyst, not a threat. Daniel now understood that temptation, when confronted honestly, could reveal the cracks in love that needed attention, rather than destroy the foundation completely. Can love grow stronger when tested by betrayal that never crossed physical lines? One quiet evening, Daniel and Laura sat together by the lake near their apartment. The sun was setting, painting the water with shades of gold and orange. Daniel took Laura's hand in his, feeling the warmth, the life, the bond that had survived the storm. I don't know what the future holds, he said softly. But I know I want to face it with you. Laura smiled, a mixture of relief, love, and cautious hope. We'll figure it out, she replied. Together. For the first time in months, Daniel felt a sense of peace. The intensity of his emotional entanglement with Lena had faded into understanding, and he realized that love wasn't about perfection, it was about effort, honesty, and the willingness to confront challenges together. Because sometimes, the deepest betrayals don't end love, they teach it to be stronger, wiser, and more aware. That night, Daniel reflected on the choices he had made, the boundaries he had tested, and the lessons he had learned. He understood that loyalty wasn't blind obedience, it was conscious care, active attention, and the courage to face temptation with clarity. Lena's influence had been real, emotional, and profound, but it had ultimately reinforced the value of his commitment to Laura. As he lay in bed beside Laura, he realized the truth: love could survive emotional storms, but only if both hearts remained willing to see the truth, forgive, and rebuild. Yet even as he closed his eyes, a quiet thought lingered in the back of his mind. Would the memory of temptation always remain, a shadow in the corners of their love, or had it finally passed entirely, leaving only lessons and growth behind? The couple faced the delicate path of rebuilding trust, with the awareness that some scars can never fully disappear, but can make love wiser.